So I actually want to acknowledge Kathy here, and I know she's probably not expecting it, but oh, she likes it. Good, good. And I was going to say, and that's because Kathy was actually one of the first early innovators at Dawn Canada, because she actually ran an employment-focused program to teach women with disabilities technical skills back in the day when personal computers were a new idea. So I guess we're dating ourselves a little there, Kathy, but what can I say? And of course, in terms of setting the stage around the gendered issue, and I already hit the guy at ESDC with the gender question, so that's what I'm here to talk about. And really more, I would say more clearly, an intersectional perspective on what we need to be thinking about always when we're thinking about innovation when it comes to employment and people with disabilities. And so, again, to remind people, and again, it was very clear from even some of the panelists today, around the concept of intersectionality in this conversation is that we mean cross-disability by that we mean that we want to think about people's social location. So if a person is Indigenous, an immigrant, a person of color from the LGBTQ community, and of course, a woman, then there are some specific data sets that don't necessarily reflect who we really are and who's really being most affected and furthest marginalized from the job market. Specifically, I think also to bring, very important work that Realize is doing and that Wendy is doing, is to talk about the idea that there are so many data sets that don't really reflect who and how many people we're really talking about and how high those numbers are. So for women and girls with disabilities, it's at the low end, maybe 50%, but at the high end, the unemployment rate's 70% or higher. And that's shocking. In the context of why, I think there's some things that we need to be reminded of, which is, of course, that in the context of women, we're talking about issues around childcare. Very important thing to think about is all the unpaid work that women are doing and do throughout their lifespan, from when they are young until they are old, and how much of an impact that is having on their incomes, how much of an impact it's having on their ability to gain meaningful work and to retain that meaningful work. And to think about things also like transportation, and I'm sure it came up on some of the other panels, but I was going to say again in the context of women because they are poorer, public transportation or access to transportation needs to be something that we think about. She's not here today, but our friend Diane Dreger actually did a very courageous thing and took, I believe it was the city of Winnipeg, to the Human Rights Tribunal there around the fact that because she has an episodic illness, in fact, she could not access the adapted transportation because they wouldn't and couldn't understand this idea that she was somebody who would sometimes need this and sometimes not. So I think, again, another thing that I think is important that Wendy brought up and that we really need to think about is this idea that disability is an evolving concept and that the United Nations reminds us of that in the context of the UN CRPD. And also, again, around this idea of need and even what you were talking about, right? That when we're talking about prevention, that we need to think about work-life balance for people. And that's particularly true for women. And that's because of what I mentioned already, which is all this unpaid work we're doing and continue to do. And so I think in terms of just take a few minutes to talk about the good things and focus on the positive, right, Maureen? And again, I would say that that is one of the most positive things is in fact our partnership with CCRW. And that's a partnership that for me was a very important opportunity for Dawn Canada to begin working with somebody who is actually moving things forward in terms of the employment context and why that's such a critical partnership. And the kind of partnerships that CCRW and Dawn are engaged in are not about hit the ground running at this point. It's about really starting to try and understand better what the issues are and what kind of changes we need to make to programs so that they do better reflect an intersectional approach to employment for people with disabilities. And so one of the things we're doing, and Kaylin's here too, I know Kaylin, I saw her before, there you are, Kaylin, and Maureen's team are running a program called Youth of Futures, and in fact in Montreal, in partnership with CCRW, Dawn Canada is supporting a project that's focused otherwise across the country on men and women, and in fact in Montreal, the first and only program that we know of that's focused on young women with disabilities. And again, location's important. It's located within the YWCA of Montreal because, again, it is about partnership. It is about transferring that responsibility for people to take up the specific issues that women and girls face, and that needs to be done. And again, there's lots of women in this room. There's lots of folks in this room. If you haven't applied the gender lens, shame on you. And if you're thinking about it, good, and please go ahead. So the Youth of the Futures is, I think, a very good example of something that we're doing that's going to help us understand better what kind of changes we need to see in programs and services, and in fact, some of the early data is showing that already. I will say that one of the most shocking anecdotes that I had from one of the first cohorts, and I think Kaylin knows this and Maureen knows this, is that I had one young woman who told us that one of the reasons she was looking for a job was because she was tired of being beaten and she wanted to get out of her house. So I think, again, full circle, when we're talking about gender and disability, that you need to understand that there are other factors affecting why a woman with a disability may not be able to look for a job or gain employment. Oh, 3 minutes, see, and I didn't prepare. So I think the important thing to focus on in terms of opportunities first is something that Minister Haidu, I think, will be talking about tomorrow, which is important changes to the labor code, including flexible work arrangements, because I think that becomes a very critical and important one, and a lot of the other things that were covered by other panelists. And I want to, I think, wrap up with talking about a very exciting project that we are doing with some of the folks in this room. Some of our partners are here. So there's a new project coming our way called Do the Rights Thing. And Do the Rights Thing is a human rights education project that Dawn Canada is delighted to be launching in 2018 with our partners at CCRW, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and in fact, one of our provincial partners, BCANS, is also here. And what that's about is, again, using Dawn's four-pillar approach, which is research, education, policy, and advocacy, is ensuring that women with disabilities, including women workers, understand what their rights are, educating employers and service providers about their obligations, but also about their opportunities. And finally, focusing on the kind of policy change that we need to address for that situation to change. And did I make it under? You didn't say stop. So I'll stop there. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.